Under the flickering streetlight, a tiny shadow shifted between garbage bins, barely visible in the pounding rain. His ribs carved harsh lines against his mud-caked fur, and when he finally looked up, his amber eyes held a story too painful for words. This German Shepherd puppy, no more than 4 months old, trembled uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from a fear etched deep by human hands. The collar marks around his raw neck suggested someone had once called him family, yet here he was, discarded among broken bottles and rotting food. At first, he tried to retreat further into the darkness when our rescue team approached, as if invisible were the only safe thing left to be. How could someone look into those trusting eyes and decide this loyal creature deserved nothing but abandonment? Little did we know that this shivering ball of fur, soon to be named Blaze, would teach us all what resilience truly means. The journey to rescue Blaze began in those first critical moments. As our rescue team carefully approached the trembling pup, it became clear this wasn't a simple case of abandonment. This was systematic neglect that had unfolded over months. The light from our flashlights revealed what the shadows had mercifully hidden: patches of fur missing entirely, exposing raw, inflamed skin underneath. His coat, what remained of it, wasn't the rich black and tan of a healthy German Shepherd, but instead a dull, matted mess that clung to his skeletal frame like a worn-out blanket. When we finally coaxed Blaze into the carrier, he didn't fight or bark. He simply surrendered, as if he'd learned long ago that resistance only brought more pain. The car ride to the emergency veterinary clinic was eerily silent. Most rescued animals vocalize, whimper, growl, something to express their fear or discomfort. But Blaze had moved beyond that, into a place where survival meant becoming invisible, making no sound, taking up as little space as possible in the world. The clinic's harsh fluorescent lights exposed the full extent of Blaze's condition. At an age when German Shepherd puppies should be bundles of energetic chaos, Blaze weighed just 18 pounds, less than half what he should have. The veterinarian's gentle hands moved methodically over his fragile body, each touch revealing another concern. "I'm detecting at least 3 separate infections," she said quietly, pointing to his ears, his gums, and most worryingly, an abscess on his right hind leg that had gone untreated for so long that the muscle had begun to atrophy. Blood work confirmed what we already suspected: severe anemia, elevated white blood cells fighting numerous infections, and signs of long-term malnutrition that had affected his organ function. Blaze wasn't just hungry, his body had been in starvation mode for so long that it had begun consuming its own muscle tissue to stay alive. The veterinarian estimated he hadn't had a proper meal in at least 3 weeks. The X-rays revealed the most heartbreaking detail: a poorly healed fracture in his hind leg. It wasn't a recent injury, but one that had mended incorrectly without medical intervention, causing him to develop the awkward, painful gait we'd noticed. This wasn't an accident or a moment of neglect. This was a puppy who had endured chronic suffering, day after day, with no one to help ease his pain. Perhaps most telling was Blaze's reaction to human touch. When the veterinary technician reached to adjust the IV line delivering much-needed fluids, Blaze didn't just flinch. His entire body convulsed in anticipation of pain, his eyes squeezing shut as if bracing for a blow that, this time, wouldn't come. It was a learned response, one that spoke volumes about what his short life had consisted of before now. As we pieced together Blaze's likely history, a familiar and disturbing pattern emerged. The specific callus patterns around his neck suggested he'd been kept constantly chained or tethered in the same position. The wear on his teeth, unusual for such a young dog, indicated he had likely chewed desperately at whatever confined him. Most telling were the peculiar marks on his hindquarters, consistent with what we've seen in dogs used prematurely for breeding purposes. The picture became clearer with each examination. Blaze had likely been part of a backyard breeding operation, valued not as a companion, but as a future stud dog for those looking to profit from purebred puppies without proper care or regulation. When he developed health issues that made him less valuable for breeding, he was simply discarded, an investment that no longer promised returns. The day turned to evening as the veterinary team stabilized Blaze, administered antibiotics for his infections, treated the parasites that had been draining what little strength he had left, and cleaned the wounds that covered his young body. Through it all, he remained unnervingly silent and still, his amber eyes following each person who approached with a mixture of resignation and wariness. That first night, one of our volunteers stayed by his kennel, just talking softly and letting him know he wasn't alone anymore. Sometime around 3 a.m., exhausted from the treatments and perhaps feeling the first effects of pain medication that finally granted him relief, Blaze allowed himself to truly sleep. Not the vigilant, half-conscious state we'd seen earlier, but a deep, healing sleep with his guard finally lowered. It was both a victory and a heartbreaking reminder. For what we estimated to be at least 6 months of his young life, nearly his entire existence, Blaze had known nothing but pain, fear, and rejection. He had never experienced the simple joys that should be the birthright of every puppy: the security of a loving home, the comfort of a full belly, the gentle touch of someone who cared for him, or even the basic dignity of being valued simply for existing. In those quiet early morning hours, as Blaze finally slept without trembling, the magnitude of what had been stolen from him became clear. His body bore the physical scars of neglect, but it was the invisible wounds, the fear that made him cower at sudden movements, the way he tucked his tail so tightly it almost disappeared, the learned expectation that humans brought only pain. These would be the hardest to heal. For 6 long months the world had taught Blaze that he didn't matter. Now somehow, we needed to teach him something entirely different. As days turned into weeks, Blaze remained curled in the corner of his kennel, physically healing but emotionally unreachable. That's when Sarah, one of our quietest volunteers, asked if she could try something different. Unlike the others, Sarah never tried to coax Blaze out or encourage interaction. Instead, she simply sat on the floor outside his kennel, her back against the wall, reading aloud from whatever novel she was enjoying that week. At first, it seemed pointless. Blaze remained frozen in his corner, eyes fixed on this strange human who didn't demand anything from him. But Sarah came back, day after day, her voice a gentle constant in Blaze's uncertain world. She never reached for him, never called his name expectantly. She simply existed nearby, creating what she called a bubble of safety around his space. On the 7th day, something shifted. Sarah was midway through a chapter when she noticed Blaze had inched forward, no longer pressed against the back wall. The distance was small, perhaps just a few inches, but in the language of trauma, those inches represented miles of courage. The next day, he moved a little closer. By the 10th day, Blaze would lie at the front of his kennel, while Sarah read, still carefully avoiding eye contact, but close enough that her presence had become something other than threatening. The breakthrough came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into their silent ritual. Sarah had brought her lunch, a simple sandwich she ate while continuing to read. When she set the last bite aside and turned the page, something extraordinary happened. Blaze stretched his nose toward her fingers, not aggressively or fearfully, but with the cautious curiosity that is the birthright of all dogs, the desire to know, to smell, to understand. Sarah remained perfectly still, her book forgotten. For nearly a minute, Blaze's nose hovered near her fingers, gathering information about this human who had never hurt him. Then, in a moment that brought tears to the eyes of the staff watching from a distance, Blaze ever so slightly touched his nose to Sarah's fingertip, the first voluntary contact he had initiated with any human since his rescue. The following days brought progress that once seemed impossible. Sarah began bringing small pieces of boiled chicken, setting them first at the edge of the kennel, then gradually closer to where she sat. Blaze's hunger eventually overcame his fear, and the sight of him delicately taking food from Sarah's open palm became a victory celebrated throughout the shelter. Trust came in small, precious moments. The first time Blaze didn't retreat when someone entered his kennel. the day he allowed the veterinarian to check his healing leg without sedation. The morning Sarah arrived, and Blaze lifted his head in what appeared to be recognition. But nothing prepared us for what happened exactly 1 month after Sarah began her reading sessions. She was sitting in her usual spot when Blaze approached, no longer hesitant but with purpose. He settled beside her, closer than ever before, and as Sarah continued reading, a sound filled the room that no one had heard before: the soft thump of Blaze's tail against the floor. Once, twice, then a steady rhythm that spoke louder than words ever could. After weeks of patient love, we witnessed something extraordinary. Blaze wasn't just surviving anymore. He was beginning to trust again. That wagging tail, so simple and natural for most dogs, represented a profound transformation. It wasn't just his body communicating pleasure. It was his spirit declaring that perhaps, just perhaps, the world might still contain good things worth hoping for. Once Blaze began to trust, his transformation accelerated in ways that astonished everyone at the shelter. The physical changes came first, subtle at the beginning, then increasingly dramatic as weeks passed. His ribs, once so prominently visible they could be counted from across the room, gradually disappeared beneath healthy muscle and appropriate weight. The dull, patchy coat that had hung loosely on his malnourished frame began to shed, replaced by the rich black saddle and warm tan markings characteristic of German shepherds. His eyes, previously clouded with infection and fear, cleared to a striking amber that reflected a newfound alertness to the world around him. But it was the emergence of Blaze's personality that truly captivated everyone who witnessed his journey. The first time he picked up a toy, a simple tennis ball Sarah had left in his kennel, he held it awkwardly in his mouth, as if uncertain what purpose this strange object served. He carried it hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence until one memorable afternoon when he actually dropped it at Sarah's feet and backed away, his eyes communicating a question he didn't yet know how to ask. When Sarah gently tossed the ball a few feet away, something extraordinary happened. Blaze bounded after it with an unmistakable playfulness that had everyone watching in tearful silence. It wasn't just that he was playing, it was that he was finally allowing himself to be what he truly was: a puppy, experiencing joy perhaps for the first time. As Blaze's physical health stabilized, outdoor adventures became possible. His first steps onto grass provoked a reaction that reminded everyone just how much of normal canine life he had missed. He froze, paws splayed awkwardly on this strange new surface before cautiously lowering his nose to investigate. Within minutes he was rolling in the grass, legs kicking skyward, reveling in sensations that should have been familiar but were entirely new to him. Each experience, feeling sunshine on his face, investigating the curious scent of flowers, watching leaves dance in the breeze, seemed to awaken something essential in his spirit. Blaze's rehabilitation coincided with the arrival of the Thompsons, a middle-aged couple whose last German shepherd had passed away 6 months earlier. They had come to the shelter looking for a senior dog, someone who might be overlooked, as Lisa Thompson explained. They certainly hadn't planned on adopting a young dog with Blaze's complicated history, but fate has its own designs. Lisa was volunteering in the shelter's laundry room when Blaze wandered in, following Sarah on one of their short walks designed to build his confidence in new environments. Something in his cautious demeanor caught Lisa's attention. "He reminded me of someone healing from an invisible wound," she later shared. Something in his eyes said he was trying so hard to be brave. The Thompsons began visiting Blaze regularly, sitting with him and Sarah, becoming part of his small circle of trusted humans. Robert Thompson, a retired carpenter with gentle hands and infinite patience, brought specially carved wooden puzzle toys that occupied Blaze's growing intelligence. Lisa would bring her knitting, creating a peaceful environment where Blaze could observe human interaction without pressure. Together with Sarah, they created a bridge between shelter life and what everyone hoped would be Blaze's future, a real home. After 6 weeks of these visits, the shelter's adoption coordinator, approached the Thompsons about fostering Blaze. His medical needs are addressed, she explained, but his emotional recovery needs the stability only a home environment can provide. The couple didn't hesitate. 2 days later, Blaze cautiously explored the Thompsons' ranch-style home, investigating each room with Sarah present for security, before settling on a plush dog bed placed strategically in a quiet corner of the living room. The foster arrangement was meant to last 2 weeks. By day 3, the Thompsons knew Blaze would never leave. The transformation that began at the shelter accelerated exponentially in the stability of a home environment. Blaze's confidence grew daily, evidenced in small victories that might seem insignificant to an outsider, but represented monumental progress for a dog with his background. The first night he slept through without waking in panic. The morning he greeted Robert with a tentative lick instead of shrinking away. The afternoon he actually barked, at a squirrel in the backyard, expressing himself vocally for what might have been the first time in his life. 2 months into fostering, the Thompsons made it official. The adoption ceremony was small but meaningful. Just shelter staff, Sarah, and a few volunteers who had been part of Blaze's journey. As Lisa signed the papers, Blaze sat calmly beside her, occasionally glancing up, as if to confirm that this human was, indeed, now his person. Where once he had cowered at the slightest sound, he now leaned gently against Robert's leg. Secure in the knowledge that he was safe, he was wanted, and most importantly, he mattered. Today, Blaze bears little resemblance to the trembling, emaciated creature found behind that dumpster. His coat gleams in the sunlight as he races across the Thompsons' fenced yard, confidently retrieving the balls Robert throws for him. He sleeps on a memory foam bed, but often prefers the foot of the Thompsons' queen-sized mattress, where Lisa doesn't mind his warming presence during cold winter nights. He's learned basic commands with remarkable intelligence, mastering in weeks what takes many dogs months to understand. The limp from his old injury remains, a permanent reminder of his past, but it doesn't slow him down or diminish his enthusiasm for morning walks or evening play sessions. The most telling transformation, however, is evident in how Blaze now responds to strangers. Where once he saw potential threats in every unfamiliar face, he now approaches new people with cautious optimism, not naive trust, but a hard-won belief that most humans are good and worthy of a chance. At the local park, children asked to pet him, marveling at his gentle nature, without ever knowing the darkness from which that gentleness emerged. Today, Blaze lives with a loving family who sees him for what he truly is, not a discarded animal, but a loyal companion with an incredible capacity for forgiveness, Sarah reflected during a recent visit to the Thompsons. He reminds us that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and love. As if understanding her words, Blaze pressed his head against her hand, no longer seeking reassurance, but offering it instead. In that simple gesture lay perhaps the most profound transformation of all. The abused puppy who once knew only how to receive pain had learned, against all odds, how to give comfort instead. When we look at Blaze today, racing through tall grass with the wind ruffling his healthy coat, leaping to catch a frisbee mid-air, or simply resting contentedly beside the people who love him, it's almost impossible to reconcile this joyful creature with the broken puppy we found trembling behind that dumpster. His transformation isn't just heartwarming, it's a powerful reminder of what becomes possible when we refuse to turn away from suffering. Blaze's story reminds us that every animal, no matter how damaged or discarded, deserves a second chance at life, at joy, at feeling safe in this often challenging world. For every Blaze whose story we've been able to share, countless others wait silently in shelters across the country, each with their own history, their own capacity for transformation, their own potential for giving and receiving love. The difference between a story of continued suffering and one of remarkable redemption often comes down to the dedicated work of rescue organizations operating on limited resources and boundless compassion. These unsung heroes. The veterinarians who work overtime to heal broken bodies, the behaviorists who gently rehabilitate wounded spirits, the volunteers who sit patiently for hours, earning trust one small gesture at a time. They are the bridge between despair and hope for animals who cannot speak for themselves. What many people don't realize is that these transformations happen through a community effort. While not everyone can foster or adopt, every act of support creates ripples that reach animals like Blaze. A donation that might seem modest to you could provide the medical treatment that saves a life. A few hours of volunteer time might be the consistent human presence that helps a traumatized animal learn to trust again. Even sharing stories like Blaze's expands the circle of awareness, potentially connecting an abandoned animal with the person meant to become their family. The beauty of rescue work lies in its reciprocal nature. Blaze's family didn't just save him. In many ways, he saved them too. The Thompsons often speak about how Blaze's resilience inspired them during their own challenges, how his gradual opening to joy reminded them to appreciate simple pleasures, how his forgiveness taught them about moving forward rather than dwelling in pain. This is the gift that rescued animals offer. They remind us of our better selves, of our capacity for compassion, of the profound difference that patience and love can make in a life. Your support, whether through adoption, fostering, volunteering, donation, or simply sharing these stories, means more animals like Blaze can experience the transformation from fearful survival to joyful living. It means more families discovering the unique bond that forms when an animal who has known the worst of humanity experiences the best of it instead. It means writing new endings to stories that once seemed destined for tragedy. As Blaze continues his journey, now teaching neighborhood children about compassion for animals or greeting senior citizens during therapy dog visits, his impact extends far beyond his own remarkable transformation. Like ripples in still water, the effects of one rescue reach outward in ways we may never fully comprehend. By liking and subscribing to witness more incredible journeys of hope, and by sharing Blaze's story to inspire others, you become part of this expanding circle of compassion, one that transforms not just the lives of animals in need, but our human community as well.